Well, they were understanding when I told them. They weren't understanding when the symptoms came around.
Welcome back. It's Ben, and you've guessed it, I've still got a cold, so I'm going to get through some stuff right up front. We'll get right to the interview. On this episode, we've got Pat. He works in the video gaming industry. He's a game developer, which is awesome, and if you're into gaming, he's worked on some games you know quite well. On the one hand, it's a fun episode to be able to talk to somebody who develops video games for a living and works inside a recognizable company. On the other hand, it's a charged up conversation at times that really gets frank at certain moments because, having a cool job is not to say he hasn't seen his share of on-the-job challenges directly related to Tourette's. Coprolalia for one, and let me just say as we discuss this, I'm not going to censor any of that. Maybe this is a good time to set some policy, and you can let me know if I've got it wrong here. Casual curse words and so on, I don't mean tics, just casual curse words conversationally. I'll put a little beep on that just to be as universal as possible in terms of audience. And you're going to hear that a couple times here. But coprolalia, which for people who aren't familiar, can involve the vocalization of words or phrases that people may find offensive. I won't beep any of that stuff out because there's no intention behind it. It's just a sound in that instance. It's not a word with meaning, just a vocalized tic. So, policy, not going to censor coprolalia. The only time I'll plan to edit out coprolalia tics is at the request of the person I'm having the conversation with. I hope that's fair. And don't get the idea that that's all over this episode, if that matters to you. It's a really good conversation, and Pat makes some excellent observations about the gaming industry, the video gaming industry, not just as a place to work, but also in how disabilities and disorders, including Tourette's, are portrayed in video game characters. He's seen that. By the way, if you're a kid or if you're the parent of a kid with Tourette's who's interested in video game development as a potential career, Pat, I think, is a great person to talk to and a great role model. He also, incidentally, addresses a question I've gotten a good number of times lately, actually a lot lately, and that's on the anecdotal effectiveness of CBD. And when it comes to medicating, Pat, in the course of telling his story, hits a really good point about when it's right to medicate. Is it for the Touretter or for society? That's later in the interview. Before we get going, toward the end of the episode, I'll play an audio comment I received for this podcast. This is a cool way to interact and to get your voice on the podcast. If you want to weigh in on anything from any past episode or anything else, you can send me a voice file of yourself talking and I'll play it on the show. I'll have more instructions on how to do that at the end of this episode, following the clip that somebody sent in. But first, let's get to the conversation. So just so I have this part right, could you state your name, the part of the world that you live in, and just generally what you do?
My name is Pat. I live in the Seattle area, but currently I'm in San Francisco for job training. I'm in the video game industry. I've been working at Microsoft Game Studios for the last 8 years, including the last 3 years on the game Minecraft.
That's awesome.
But I've just switched jobs and tackling something even more intense, and actually was really one of my minor obsessions growing up, which is video game physics. I've joined the Havoc team, which was recently also acquired by Microsoft.
Yeah.
And I am going to be what they call a developer relations engineer, which is basically I help other game studios put Havoc technologies in their game.
So, yeah, I mean, could you kind of set a definition for what game physics is? Like, what does that entail?
Yeah, totally. So game physics is really, it can represent almost everything you see in a game, from simply rocks tumbling realistically down a hillside to people falling down realistically once you shot them, to even the math to determine that you shot someone. All of that is...
Wow.
All of that uses 3D math that is at the crux of what we generally call physics in video games.
Yeah.
So it's a combination of both the dynamics, the simulation, as well as the collision detection, which is used in its own ways during the game update process. The game simulation.
So how'd you go in that direction? I mean, do you have a science background in addition to just being interested in games?
So yeah, my a bit of life history is I was actually born in Seattle, Washington, but I grew up in Ferndale, Michigan, which is a town just at the northern border of Detroit.
Okay.
Uh, but then I went back to Redmond to go to school at a really small specialized university called DigiPen Institute of Technology.
Okay.
And they, at the time, really only offered a couple of degrees, basically one in art for games and another in programming for games. It was actually, the campus was the upper floor of a building we rented from Nintendo of America.
Okay.
It wasn't really much of a campus, but it it got us access really closely to a lot of interesting technology. They shared some of it with us for our classes, and I got to like learn how to program on a Game Boy Color, which
Yeah.
was, kind of a blast.
So what time frame is this?
This was I started school in 2005 and finished just before 2010. So I can kind of say I did it in 4 years, even though it was like 4.5 with a couple summers. Because DigiPen is also like super hard in that it's like 154 credit hours, I think,
Huh.
instead of 120 for the degree, and it's only still a bachelor's. So, but what it does do is really the most important thing about that school, I think, was the focus on projects and team projects where you pair off into teams and you make something for the entire year together and just go through that process of just the pain of trying to create a game from scratch. And really that training was really essential in building my resolve to all the kind of BS you have to deal with in this industry.
Man, well, yeah. I mean, what could you take us into that? I mean, what do you have to deal with?
Oh, you have to deal with generally a lot of stress. Really,
Yeah.
so the major intersection between my Tourette's and my job came to a head at my previous project, which was called Project Spark.
Okay.
It was a game making game that used a tile-based visual programming language that made it easy for kids to use. I worked on like the world creation bits, so you clicked and dragged, and terrain sprung up under your mouse. That was all me.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
actually still waiting on a patent that we filed in like 2013. It's
Oh, no
had
way.
like 3 rejections, but they're still going at it. But so really, we have a term we lovingly in the game industry call crunch, which is really for salaried employees, it's forced unpaid overtime
Gotcha.
for the good of the team. And really, for me, the intersection, the major intersection where I had to make a choice between my personal happiness and my job really came to a head because actually at the time I was only recently diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. Like my brother was diagnosed when he was only 7,
Yeah.
but maybe I just have a feeling I had a bit more body awareness, and I could tell that people reacted to my tics weirdly, and I didn't know they were tics at the time. I just knew they were weird behaviors that I should totally shut down and hide away.
So
And
what
so
kind of
that was
tics? Like, what were you dealing with?
really pretty minor shit at that point, like just eye blinking, like left to right, left to right.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, a lot of throat clearing, a lot of sniffing,
Yeah.
and I guess so. The progression of that, when I was at DigiPen in college, I started noticing more of my face needing to move.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then I guess I started to notice what they call the premonitory urge, right?
Mm-hmm.
That annoying to kind of painful need to move a certain part of your body.
Yeah.
And after I moved it, it didn't quite go away all the time. And I'm like, what's that? And I just kind of tried to ignore it a bit more until, like, I guess I started noticing like my foot pointing when I walked.
Yeah.
That was, tripping me over.
Yeah. I've definitely had that. I mean, I've had variations where I would, I would kind of like extend my foot so it's kind of like flat and in line with my shin, or I would just like make sure that with my toe or the toe of my shoe, I would kick the ground behind me when I walked. I mean, that drove me crazy.
Yeah.
And how old are you at this point? I mean, if your brother's diagnosed at 7,
he's a year older than me, and I'm 30.
Okay. So when you started noticing your tics and, the pre-diagnosis, how old were you at that time?
I started noticing about 20, 21.
Okay. Gotcha.
And then it wasn't until about 25 that I actually went to a neurologist and got confirmation, because I had an explosion in my symptoms. And I would consider myself pretty, moderately symptomatic at this point. I have a pretty full range of symptoms, including coprolalia, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Which causes issues.
Yeah. So, I mean, you were talking about the difficulty at work, and I mean,
yeah.
What
so I guess,
like?
I started punching myself in the face because of the stress. That's not fun.
Oh God. Well,
it's really painful.
And was that kind of like was that a repeat tic, like something you would do multiple times?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I would like go home and give myself like a right hook to the jaw multiple times.
Wow. And did you have to do it a certain way to feel satisfied by it?
Kind of, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. It did have, like, I definitely have a bit of OCD bent to my tics as well. The needing to do it until it's just right. The needing to tap a post as I walk by it, not necessarily because anything bad will happen. It just feels like I need to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, is this stuff, that you would just kind of, if you're out in public or at work, I mean, would you just kind of hold it in as much as you could? I mean, I know holding it in is virtually impossible in some situations.
No, exactly.
But did you have to find like a corner to go to release, or?
At first I was mortified. Like, once I realized what was going on, I was still doing absolutely everything I could. And like the first time I really ticked out loud, I think I shouted faggot in like a cubicle like room.
Yeah.
And I think everybody had their headphones on and nobody said anything, but I was absolutely like mortified. And I like, it was, right about then that I felt I couldn't not say anything to my superiors anymore. So I made my boss aware, and have been since then. Like you mentioned, it's virtually impossible to hold in. So at this point, for the most part, when I'm in an actual, work building full of people who know me, then I don't feel the need to hold it in nearly as much. And, just like today, I was shaking pretty visibly side to side as I walked, and holding my arms in all sorts of weird, uncomfortable postures. But, I just go with that. And it's a lot easier to just go with it if I can pre-educate people around me about it.
Yeah. And that's something I'm really curious about is, well, first, the reaction from your bosses when you told them. How did you do it, and how did they react?
Well, I've definitely had to do it multiple times to multiple bosses. Unfortunately, the reality of the game industry is that, single jobs don't last a while, but the advantage of being at a big company like Microsoft is that they can kind of absorb those losses and shuffle people around and keep people employed instead of just tossing everybody out on the streets, which has happened to my friends at school quite a few times.
So I mean, were they just kind of incredulous, or did they just kind of brush it off and say like, whatever? Or?
It's been varied. Let me see. Like the first boss I told was super understanding and supportive. However, future bosses have had, they were understanding when I told them. They weren't understanding when the symptoms came around.
Right.
I was sat down in my office and told by my manager that my previous week, they waited a whole week. My previous weeks, I had a bit of a coprolalia ticking fit after a bit of a stressful conversation, as you do, stress induces tics.
Right.
So I kind of closed the door a little hard. Maybe my arm twitched a bit hard while I was closing it. And then I just let it out.
Yeah.
Then he sat me down and told me I was being unprofessional.
God. I mean, how do you handle something like that? I mean, how did you address it?
I don't even remember at the time. Like, it's from what I remember, I was so emotionally affected by it. I almost like blanked it out of my memory.
Wow.
It was like, no, I mean, I couldn't stop myself from breaking down in tears and like trying to explain everything I could all at once to try to find some way out of this horrible situation that I found myself in.
I mean, God, I mean, were you able to kind of relate that, you know, as much as it bothers them, it bothers you infinitely more? And that,
no, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there was a complete change of heart once they actually, you know, fucking talked to me about it and not just sat there making assumptions as people are apt to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the worst experience I had at work, definitely. And even on my last team, just even had a really negative interaction with somebody. Like, it was basically like the test team was off in their own building for a while, and then we all moved to a new building with the test team integrated. And this one tester who obviously hadn't been around me heard me ticking. My main vocal tick is the word Judas, which I can't trace to anything. Just like most people I hear can't really trace their vocal ticks to anything in particular.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. And he just came up to me and smirked and kind of like said, "Got a problem?" Long story short, his contract didn't get renewed because of how I, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it was exactly that instance, but my boss kind of made it sound like it was taken care of in a way. Because that's just, I think my team at that point was so on board with me. They understood that was so out of line. And also his response was like, "Oh, I wasn't trying to be flippant." I'm like, even if you were trying, you couldn't have done it any harder.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, was he totally unaware that you had Tourette's, or had he been made
absolutely.
aware? Yeah, okay.
I mean, as if that's like an acceptable way to like talk to anyone.
Yeah,
just like smirking and saying "got a problem." That's the classic troll face internet meme.
Yeah,
and so that's exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, but I mean, do you think it was him just kind of like just being sarcastic to anybody, or do you think he like really picked up on your tics and he was just gonna test you or something?
I think maybe he was just confused by the sounds. Honestly, I don't think he knew it was tics. Certainly, I don't think it was that. It wasn't him being a dick to me because he knew I had Tourette's. It was him being a dick to me because I was weird.
Yeah,
which, you know.
Yeah, not cool.
Isn't much different in my view.
Right. Well, so for the people who do work with you and do understand, I mean, what's that dynamic like? Once people became aware, did they become hypersensitive around you? Did they treat you as like special or different, or was it just the same old thing, but they just had a new understanding of you?
I think it was just a new understanding of me. At that point, I think it would have been different had I come into the company with as symptomatic as I became.
Yeah, gotcha.
But I think I had the like super great advantage of already having proven myself by the time the symptoms really became problematic.
But so what's it like today? I mean, is it pretty harmonious there for you? And you said you're in San Francisco right now, but just
it's a very different experience down in San Francisco than my previous gigs. It's still, I think, a learning process because there are just some general do's and don'ts. I like to make my managers aware of. I really don't like being invited to random closed door conversations about things that could really easily be handled over email. It just really triggers my anxiety. Like, there have been really bad conversations that have happened in that way, and I just don't like being reminded of it.
I think that's really important, that, you know, the stress triggering of something that they're trying to address. You know, I mean, it's counterproductive, it's counterintuitive. You know, is that something you've tried to convey to them, that there are different ways that they can handle it that might be better for everybody? And
no,
especially
absolutely. I was very explicit about that on Friday, and then on Monday he did it.
Okay.
So if if our next conversation doesn't kind of instill that again, then I know how to work my way up a ladder at the very least.
Yeah. But I mean, you're doing what you love. I mean, do you find any sort of like therapeutic moments when you're developing or?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find it extremely focusing when I'm in the middle of solving an intense problem. Like actually the last couple of days have been relatively good in that I've been tasked with programming a collision detection algorithm that I did back sophomore year of college.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something I'm very familiar with, and I'm just cracking through it, and I'm apparently already like a week and a half ahead of where they thought I'd be.
Nice.
But that's what you get when you've done it before and your brain doesn't turn off.
Nice. Well, how did you discover that this was something? I mean, just outside being generally interested in video games and enjoying video games, how did you find that this is something you would be good at?
It really wasn't until I actually went to college that I realized I could handle programming. I had very little programming experience before that. Even though my school, like you, I ended up not necessarily, again, because specifically of the Tourette's, but also just that public school was not a great fit for me at all. I ended up also going to a small private school,
right,
which was a much better fit for my entire family.
So was it like a smaller class size and fewer people
yeah. No, absolutely. I had like a graduating class of about like 40 to 50 people. It was, and I guess it was also specifically a gifted school. So everybody had their own thing.
Okay.
But there wasn't at the time a strong computer science program. They had like one or two programming classes, but they were in languages or applications that I really didn't care for, because I wanted to learn how to program games, and no one there was interested in teaching me how to program games.
Yeah.
So I had it set out in my head that I wanted to be a designer. I wanted to make the fun, That's where everybody, that's where, the fame and fortune come from in my mind at the time.
Right. Yeah.
So I kind of had it in my head that I would go to school, learn how to program, and then kind of make an en route into design through that. But then I realized I'm actually pretty good at programming. So what I really get out of programming is that it's problem solving through an interface that's programming language. So what's more interesting to me than, working with computers and technology in video games is really just solving problems. And it's great that I can solve problems that end up making a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, yeah.
But it even goes back to the kind of games that I like to play. Like the games that I like to play they're varied, but the ones I get super focused into generally involve resource management of like a really complicated nature. So what it really comes down to is that I love being able to balance the needs and wants of a lot of different things at once and come up with a solution.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of mental activation that really helps. I mean, for me, it really helps control my tics in a way, because my mind is so enthralled and engaged with something that my body doesn't have the energy to move or do whatever.
Yeah, but I totally know what you mean, because I'm sort of like that with music. When I'm totally focused on music or doing some sort of like written text that's really intensive and I'm in the zone, I if I'm ticking, I don't notice it. It doesn't bother me, put it that way. So it's a really good place to be, where I feel like I'm making progress on something that to me is, even though I have ADD, it's way more linear, to where I can just kind of like crack at it and go at it and get something done and create something.
I did manage to find one healthy way to funnel that sort of obsession as a teenager, and that was Dance Dance Revolution.
Dance Dance Revolution? Yeah.
Yeah. I like competed in freestyle, like, dance to the arrows, like creatively competitions, and back in Michigan.
Is that the kind of thing they would have at like shopping malls and that sort of thing?
And get the big crowds to watch me, and that was, I'm totally not, I love people watching when I'm doing awesome things.
Oh, that's so cool. I mean, did you find sort of like a zone you could get into when you're doing that too? I mean,
Yeah,
was that
absolutely.
in itself a
Like,
therapeutic type thing?
yeah, no, absolutely. Dance Dance Revolution was like, I didn't realize that at the time, but it was my first real great way to control the symptoms of Tourette's without knowing I had it. But in that, you have to get into such an intense zone, combining that into how to move your body to hit the right note, all while twisting your body to hit the next note.
Yeah.
And I was so known that literally my senior yearbook voted me most likely to lead a revolution of dancing. And actually with dance, I found quite also a bit of focus. Just it calmed me in ways that other things did.
So, as far as game developing goes, I don't know if this is too specific, but have you talked with other kids who have Tourette's who've maybe expressed an interest in this kind of thing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've talked with kids in the past about this. Actually, at 2 years ago, the Tourette Association National Education and Advocacy Conference.
Mm-hmm.
I had a chance to meet up with a lot of kids, even one whose parents bought me a drink for just like talking to him for like 15 minutes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are those conversations like? I mean, how does that go?
Really, what I try to do is, for me, I just try to probe what their interest in game development actually is, to try to really gauge if it's the right thing to pursue. In that, I like to ask them, really, what do you like about it? And the reaction I got from that kid I mentioned was really that he really, kind of like I did, liked solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily the being in the industry or the working with video games that gets it for him. It's the complex problem solving that needs to go on for high performance systems that video games are made on. And also I had a chance to like talk over Skype with the local in Washington, the local like a kid support group.
Right.
So I had a chance to Skype with them, and they were mainly interested to know if I was a YouTuber.
But I mean, I think you definitely have sort of this chance to kind of have a heroic role in that regard. And the reason I kind of thought that off the bat when we first started talking on Twitter is, when I was a kid, there were long periods of time where I didn't go out, and I just kind of kept to myself and stayed inside. And what I did was I played these video games from this company, Sierra, like the Space Quest games and the King's Quest games. And there were definitely these problem-solving games that were sometimes so involved and specific that, you had to go to the video game store at the mall and buy the hint book that would like get you to the next part. This is like, pre-internet and everything, or pre-World Wide Web, I mean.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing about Space Quest in particular is the game developers who, were called the two guys from Andromeda, they inserted themselves in the games as characters, and the games will come with posters of them. So I had posters on my wall of the game developers, and I kind of wanted to be them. They had this sort of like heroic presence to me.
Yeah.
Not to mention the games also having this sense of humor that, I was really kind of like, I guess, cutting out a repertoire based on. I mean, so it really was a huge part of my life. And had I had the opportunity to find somebody like me who could mentor me, I easily would have gone in that direction.
Right on. Yeah, no, I feel I'm really aware of the potential for impact I can have on anybody really who's interested in joining the game industry, but especially kids with Tourette, who admittedly would have, a total head start over me. They would probably have programming in like middle school at this point. They would probably have, as much of an understanding that they have Tourette's, now. Great head start over what I had going into the industry.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, and I think about this a lot. There's another podcast that I do for my employer, and one of the episodes I grouped with these developers or these computer coders who were holding these coding camps for at-risk youths and kids who lived in really, really tough living situations, rough neighborhoods. It was an easy reality that if they didn't make good choices or if they didn't have good opportunities in front of them, they could easily get assimilated into gang life. And So the police department got with the university's computer department. They found people who would be right to lead a class like that. And they did these coding camps, but the way they pitched it was, learn how to make video games. It is very simple. Some of them did, sort of these rich visual games. Some of them just did like text games where you type in your command and parse it out. But these kids were so into it. And then once they heard that, like, this is a job you could have, and if you don't want to do gaming, you can still use coding to do, just a menu of other things that could change your life. I mean, it just seems like it's a good sort of portal or gateway to get kids who, need an opportunity.
No, absolutely. And I actually, while I was at DigiPen, had somewhat of a similar opportunity. DigiPen offers summer workshops, mainly at their campus in Redmond, called Project Fun. And what I had the opportunity to do in my summer, I believe between my second and third year, I had the opportunity to actually go off site and partnering with the Urban League in Pittsburgh and Newport News, Virginia, teach kids who would never have the opportunity to pay the $1,000 plus the airfare to come to Redmond. It was essentially free for them.
Oh man, I love that.
And we taught them from knowing absolutely nothing to them making their own video games in 2 weeks.
I love that. I mean, so they get the experience. It's it could be the time of their lives, really. Then they walk away with something that they've developed.
No, absolutely. And, some kids weren't engaged. Other kids were like, this was the most engaged maybe they've ever been in their lives. And, not everybody was a star coder, but even to see one girl go off on her own, and, most of the kids took the example games we made and kind of reskinned them, added a few extra features. But one girl just kind of went off on her own and made her own complete, unique game that was simple, but it had kind of a story to it. It made sense and it worked. And that was just like the pride I was able to feel from that was great. And just even having one kid just tell me, you explain things in ways I understand, both made me sad that that's not the case for most educators, and also just really happy that I'm able to be that kind of a touch point in this kid's life, to be like, yeah, I'm teaching you a useful skill and I'm trying to connect with you and get what you understand or don't about it and come back to you with the information that you really need.
With the gaming industry, what stereotypes do you see when it comes to the portrayal of Tourette's in video games?
Yeah, thankfully I can't say I've seen many stereotypical or really any portrayals of video games, which of course also is not that great in that there are no bad ones, but there are no good ones either.
Right.
But the one that sticks out in my mind just because it was so blatant and wrong was a game called Rogue Legacy that actually decided to tack on to your character at a random point, oh, your character has Tourette's now and all their children will have Tourette's. And the only thing that changed about gameplay is that instead of a speech bubble that said ouch or something when you died, it just replaced it with punctuation, $, hashtag, exclamation point.
Right.
No value added to the game other than a cheap laugh at people with Tourette's.
Yeah. It's just a joke that they decided to go forward with. Like, wouldn't it be funny if we did this? And then they somehow have the initiative to make that something that a mass audience is going to see.
Yeah, exactly. And then apparently somebody told them about, what Tourette's actually is. And then instead of, removing it like they should have, they just changed it. Oh, we'll use the scientifically accurate term coprolalia. As if, coprolalia itself is somehow passed on from child to child. It makes no sense. They just wanted to have a cheap laugh and get away with it. And they thought they kind of could. Yeah,
labeling it coprolalia, I mean, that does nothing to excuse the joke or the punchline they're creating out of something that actual people deal with. It's
exactly
pretty disgusting.
That's one thing I've noticed when people try to use Tourette's as the butt of the joke is that they don't realize that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
They think they're making fun of the person they're calling Tourettic instead of every other person with Tourette's out there.
Yeah.
That's a conversation I've had multiple times, unfortunately. And it's just, people don't want to understand because it's too funny. Yes.
Yeah. I talked about this with somebody else I interviewed too, that I feel like the world is in this place where there's a sensitivity to so many things, and it's not cool to make jokes about certain things that we made jokes about in, the 1980s, or, it's just, but for some reason, Tourette's is still sort of held high as like the funny thing, the weird, odd thing that we don't know what it is. We're going to keep making fun of it until there's some sort of like critical mass of awareness that, and I know that's not the thought process. It's just, it's the funny thing that people latch onto. It's an easy joke, and it's easy to write into a comedy script. But I feel like it just doesn't jibe with so many other aspects of society, to where other kinds of conditions that might have been made fun of in pop culture 20 years ago, totally not cool today. But this still is.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with your point of view. It's still acceptable no matter who you are. And that's just wrong. And so, yeah, I guess, so going back to like what I can actually do, I mean, the one thing I can do is use my platform where I am in the game industry to at least spread some knowledge. And I mentioned to my manager that I'm not opposed to giving presentations in front of large audiences. And we do have a yearly game developer conference down here in San Francisco, where that's what people do. It's everything from, talking about the specifics of the physics of the blood in the newest Mortal Kombat to really heartfelt speeches about what it means to be, Native American, and even talking about that and how they try to maybe work their sense of self-identity into a game design. Is also a really great story. Or even just talking about some old game people made a long time ago and all the ins and outs, what had to go on to make that happen. And I think that's a perfect platform to talk about Tourette's, as good of a platform as any. And generally what I've found, unlike the couple of examples I've shared, people in the game industry are way more accepting of people outside the norm than other industries.
Right. Yeah. So do you, even though within your sort of workplace, coworkers and things like that, like they get you and they appreciate you, do you still do you have ways of managing your tics, or do you try to manage your tics like with medications or other rituals?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I do medicate, both with, prescription medication, as well as, I find the chemical cannabinoidol or CBD to be extremely helpful in managing my tics. But that's not something I necessarily like.
Yeah.
That's also difficult because it's not like I can just, light up in the middle of an office.
Right. Yeah. What does it do to kind of cool you out?
For me, I feel it both reduces the severity of the tics, as well as it very much reduces the premonitory urges themselves, or at least it makes them more bearable.
Right.
And I guess another reason why I'm not one of those gung ho, I'm just going to let every tic out, is because I actually have pretty embarrassing coprolalia tics. So I apparently I've been told I shout the N-word in my sleep. And if there's one tic I could get rid of, it would be that one.
Sure, yeah.
Because I don't think it's acceptable really for really anyone. I think it should die. I think that word should just die and no one should use it ever again.
Right.
But for some reason, my neurology has picked it out as something that it wants to shout. And so, no, absolutely. I feel I can't not manage that sort of tic.
So who hears you in your sleep when, who's there to document that kind of thing?
I have two housemates.
Yeah, and I've been curious too, just about the living situation and the dynamics. I mean, when you were younger, and so your brother was diagnosed at 7. How did what sort of led up to that, and what parental reactions, and how was that managed?
So really, it was mostly ignored. It got diagnosed and then promptly shoved under the rug is all I remember of it. It was basically like, oh, it's not, a big thing. It doesn't mean anything. So just ignore it. That's about all the education my parents got about it.
So no attempts to medicate it, or it's just, we got the diagnosis, we hear what it is.
He got the diagnosis and was told that really, like, the doctor was of the opinion that he would only medicate it if it was bothering the patient.
Yeah.
Not if it was bothering the parent.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And my brother had relatively mild tics and continues to have relatively mild tics in comparison to the severity that I found myself in a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess like there was very little understanding about, especially that Tourette's was anything more than just the tics. Like, we're coming to an understanding of much more these days, that it's kind of like an iceberg with all the other comorbid conditions lying below the surface.
Right.
Or that could have any, play into behavioral issues, all that sort of stuff. I guess maybe one of the phrases that was bandied about is like, you're too smart to fail at whatever. So they just expected us to power through no matter what. And, like I mentioned, it wasn't it only mildly affected my brother. And that was about where it ended in terms of them educating themselves.
So when you were diagnosed, you said you were 20, right?
25.
25. Okay. So were you out of the house at that point?
I was out of the house. I was hired at Microsoft straight out of college.
Okay.
So living on my own at that point.
Okay. So by that point, it was sort of like your thing to deal with versus any sort of parental dynamics? Or?
Yeah. So I guess it was a very different experience than most kids get.
Yeah.
So it was very much just kind of my own thing to understand, especially with regards to the severity of the tics and the content of the tics. Very much kind of, no one in my family had that previous experience. And I mean, my brother was at least very understanding. And I mean, it took my mom a while, but even she was like 3 years into my diagnosis, suddenly in a car trip, oh, the things you tic aren't what's on your mind. No, mother. I'm not thinking about Judas all the time. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. I'm glad I can, I'm glad you're giving a platform to a lot of people to share their stories.
Hey Ben, this is John Doe from the TikTok Discord group. Sorry if the sound is a bit of a crapshoot. I'm currently walking to work. I notice that many of the people that call in are looking for community, and if they want to talk to somebody online, feel free to join TikTok. You can find it at the top of the Tourette subreddit on Reddit. As for the show, so far so good. I've listened to all of the episodes, announcement through 6 so far, and I've enjoyed it greatly. I am myself a ticker of over 20 years, although rather more recently diagnosed. Feel free to use this audio, and here's hoping it's the worst audio you ever received for the show.
Thank you, John. I actually like that audio. It has a sense of place and actuality. What I like most about it is the fact that I was able to add John's comment to this episode, just like that. I love it. What I love most, though, is what he said. He's offering a place online for anyone in the Tourette world to find community. Check that out, and really, thank you, John, for sending that in. That's so awesome. And if you would like to contribute your voice to this podcast in the same way, by all means, please do. The simplest means is your smartphone. It most likely has a voice memo app on it. Just record your message onto that app, and then that app should give you the option of just emailing it straight out. You can send it to me at tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Thanks, obviously, to Pat for his time with us on this episode. I really do think he's in a unique position to connect with kids who have Tourette's, or adults too. I mean, gaming is pretty ageless these days. I think it's a cool angle. Thank you, Pat. We're going to keep in touch. Also want to give a big shout out to 12-year-old Liam out in Phoenix, Arizona, a fellow ear pop ticker I've learned. Glad to know you, and I hope I get the chance to talk to you at some point. Okay, I think I'm caught up on most of my emails. Thank you again for everything you've sent, seriously. And if I haven't responded to you, just please send me a follow-up email to slap me, because I really do intend to answer everything I get. You can also reach me on Twitter. The handle is @Tourette'sPod. Okay, here's to hoping I can kick this cold before the next episode. I kind of feel like I'm forgetting something that I'm supposed to say here, but since my voice is about to fail me, I think in the meantime, I'm just going to have to sign off and catch up next week if I have to. But thanks again, really. We'll talk to you again soon. This is Ben.